The Zoom is now recording, so if this is watched on YouTube, this is our first ever YouTube video. Hello. All right, I'm going to start the Spotify recording now. Okay, so we're going to move on to the political section of today's episode, and it is quite a big one today. We are not joined only by two guests like we were last week. We've got 6 of us here. We've got a variety of political views, to say the least. We've got Oliver, Dylan, Alex, and Joseph. Hello to you all.
Hello.
Thank you very much for coming on. We hope to spark some good debates today, make it interesting. So this is what's going to happen. Each person will have around 30 seconds to start a debate, kickfire an argument about any topic they like, any questions they want to ask, they can. And then for the next 5 or so minutes, the floor will be asked, mics will be opened, and anyone can come back at that debate starter, and we'll have a full argument on our hands, I guess. Okay, so who shall we come to first? Do we have any volunteers? Dylan,
Yep.
30 seconds, take it away.
So my question is, do you think that all universities should be made free in the UK and there to be no entrance requirements for that?
Okay, so we have our first question. Do you think all universities should be free in the UK? If anyone has an initial point of information they would like to raise, or I can just raise. Okay, Joseph, what do you want to say?
I think baseline, yes. I think they should be free. And then you said something about like academic qualifications you shouldn't need any. I think as we have in the system today, you have different levels of universities based off, you know, previous educational sort of experience. I think, you know, if you look at other countries around Europe, you know, they have free universities, or at least like heavily like government funded. So, you know, nowhere near as expensive as in the UK. And I think, yeah, you know, they should be free, like schools. You'd often hear the point that like it would, you know, it would mean a university degree wouldn't mean anything, but I think there would still be the sort of these better universities, you know, even though they're free, you still have to have the academic qualifications to get in.
Dylan, do you have an initial response to that?
Yeah, I mean, my main point about the lack of academic qualifications as an entrance requirement would be that if we were to make them more free, looking at countries like Germany, for example, and France, where their universities, as you said, Joseph, were either, you know, they're either completely free or very cheap. There's a kind of there's not much difference in you know, in grandeur between the top universities and the bottom universities. It's that you know, it's that baseline. Some universities may excel more than others, but if they were all free, if they were all the same kind of level, and that would be a high level given the academics we have in this country, I think that everyone, no matter you know, economic background or how well they did in school, should have the right to that same level of education.
Yeah, okay. Oliver.
So I agree with Joseph about the fact that there should perhaps be some academic requirements, because if there weren't, then you'd have people getting into universities that maybe they were not able to meet the academic requirements in. And I think already though they do a good job. If for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, they perhaps have lower entry requirements, which I think is correct and should be kept. But I think having no entry requirements is maybe a step too far, perhaps.
Okay. I like to make a point as well. In regard to making universities, you know, very cheap or even free, who pays for it in the end? Where does the money for the government? I want to ask one of you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Joseph, you go ahead.
All right. I mean, it sort of takes you into a larger topic of, you know, taxes and how the government should properly allocate the money through taxes. I mean, if you look at some of the sort of, so the basic answer to your question, I think, would be, in what we have at the moment through government taxes, and then it's just about, reallocating and sort of, it sort of leads into another topic of, where does this money come from and whatnot. But I think just, it's not a simple question, but reallocation of funds from, where it's not necessarily as needed, because, every person should be entitled to education, and it's where do you draw the line at basic education and, like, higher education?
Alex?
Well, if you look at the Nordic countries or the Nordic model, where education is free, average GDP per capita, average income per person, it's higher. And if income is higher, then surely people are in a higher tax bracket. I mean, discussing taxes, again, a whole separate topic. But, if we have more educated people, more doctors, they're on average getting paid higher. They're adding more to the economy. So surely there could be more benefit in that.
I think it feeds back into itself, right? Because if you give everyone in the country as the same higher level of education than they do right now, right, instead of leaving it at secondary school, giving everyone the free education to go on to university, that will result in more percentage of the working population being more qualified, which will, there's high level jobs, more income coming in, and that's obviously in the best interest of the country. So we should do whatever we can to ensure that.
But do you think it's this kind of idea that you get what you pay for effectively? Do you think that the education, the quality of education could be hindered perhaps with a reduction of fees?
Well, no, because in my hypothetical nation, it would be, they would be receiving the same amount of money that they do now. It would be the same quality. It would just be free for the person, free for the taxpayer, free for the student.
Yeah, I actually agree with Dylan and Alex in some ways there. So I don't think the quality would go down if you keep the entrance requirements. And I think it actually sounds like a decent idea in principle. The problem is, I think a lot of universities in this country would go bust if you completely scrap the fees. And I think you need to I just don't think it would necessarily work, because I think the universities require the fees to sort of stay afloat.
I think going back to the German model, they're a bigger country than us, both area and population, and they've got much less universities. If we did dismantle some of the institutions, cut down the number of universities, we could improve on the quality and also lower the cost for the average person.
Okay, so Oliver and Charlie, if universities weren't to go completely free, what new initiatives could the government take to make higher education more available to those who perhaps can't afford it at the moment?
I guess what Oxford and Cambridge are doing right now with state schools, allowing more state school kids to go into the university, whereas in the past a lot more private school kids have got in, and I think that's definitely something that should happen. Grades should be lowered for.
Are you saying positive discrimination is the only way?
Yeah, I think leveling up, and I think leveling up's a good thing. So I think
to an extent,
that's not changing the cost. It's not like they're lowering the fees because of these people coming from state schools.
You give bursaries, for example.
What I'm asking is the people who don't apply for Oxbridge in the first place because they can't. How do you make that a fairer system?
We give bursaries to people that can't afford it, and then you make kids that can afford it pay higher fees. I think that's just simple, to be honest.
How are you going to measure that?
Well, by income tax, family's income tax.
That's a bit.
So wait, but just in that model, surely the same logic applies to to everything. If people shouldn't pay tax if they're if they're lower down the income. If you're going to make that argument, then you can go to the whole point of anyone who personally owns £200,000 a year should be taxed 40% more heavily than theoretically everyone else. I think that the whole point of my motion was how can you make the biggest percentage of people leaving secondary school go to university. And I'm talking about the people that literally cannot afford the £9,000 a year. That is the base rate.
I'm sorry, I'm getting all these notifications. This is just the beauty of recording on Zoom. Okay, so that is the end of the 5 minutes allocated to that. Dylan, thank you very much. Quick show of hands, I suppose. Let's take a vote.
Well, no one
All
can
in
really see
favour.
it.
I don't know the actual practicalities of how this would actually work, but all in favour of making university tuitions free. Raise. All right, as I could have guessed, it's the 3 against 2. Well, we were always going to have that when we had an unbalanced political views. Okay, next, Oliver, let's hear it.
It might be a bit of a longer question, but Labour haven't got over 40% of the vote with a socialist candidate, so basically anyone other than Blair, in a general election since 1970, and even then they lost. What makes you think people have any kind of, in this country at the moment, have any kind of appetite for socialism? And if they don't, then do you not think it would be better to focus on being a bit more moderate to appeal to more people, and then maybe be able to enact your policies once you're in power?
So is this basically is socialism fit for the UK question?
Or it's more like, do you not think it's better to come across as more moderate?
Yeah.
Okay, Joseph, straight up there. Go.
Well, you know, you sort of hear this quite a lot, you know, oh, don't be too extreme in your political climate because you won't get voted in. I think in the UK that's true, and you see a lot of sort of, you know, even Corbyn, who 40 years ago when he was first getting into politics was essentially a rampant socialist in terms of his policy ideas, and then, you know, to actually get voted in, like you said, he sort of had to dial back on his sort of extremities on socialist policy change. I mean, he was still a socialist when he was opposition leader, but he, you know, he obviously had to dial it back to appeal to the people. And I think, you know, your question sort of included the fact that, yeah, I don't think you should have to be moderate to. Well, you sort of have to, because that's the climate we're in. But ideally, you know, people could actually, you know, acknowledge the view and not just sort of shoot it down because it's socialist.
Dylan?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Ollie's point of, you know, what is the appeal of a socialist candidate, and like, should Labour be more moderate just to actually get more votes? I think that in the next general election, when, you know, people our age, they're going to be voting, there's going to be a massive red wave of people because of, you know, it's young people more and more that are getting affected because of austerity, because of so long of having Tories in government. You know, the rise of, you know, Gen Z left wing type of politics. It's been massive, and I don't think actually going forwards with our generation, the generations, you know, coming next, that it will be necessary to moderate socialism, because people are, you know, it's getting to the point where we actually might need it.
Okay, Dyson, I'm going to come to you and hear your response to what Joseph and Dylan said. And also I asked the question to Oliver and Charlie afterwards. Is this Gen Z love for socialism a unique thing, or will the younger people in every generation always turn to leftist views? Oliver?
So firstly, in response to Joseph's response, I see what you mean when you say that you shouldn't have to hide it, but then it kind of comes both ways, because I'm sure anyone who's a socialist probably wouldn't particularly like the sight of people like UKIP or the Brexit Party. So you sort of have to be careful when you say they shouldn't have to hide it, because I'm sure you don't want that side of politics to come in to Parliament or anything like that. And secondly, to Jonah, I think it's a bit of both. I think our generation is possibly more left-wing than previous generations at our age, but I don't think massively significantly. I think a big reason for it is actually the previous question about tuition fees and things like that, and the rise of social media. And I think as we get older, I think people become less left-wing, but perhaps more so than previous generations.
That's a very good point.
Well,
Charlie, follow up on that.
I think that this idea of social media the fact that the left have kind of taken this sort of moral high ground where they've kind of said this is, these ideas that they have seem very idealistic and they're very appealing to the youth of this population who appear to have had enough of the austerity and then they want a new government. I think the practicalities of socialism is just not a practical thing. It's just not something that I think this country needs. I think this country is in a very good state at the moment. Obviously we've had a worldwide pandemic, so I think it's very difficult to judge a government based on such extreme circumstances.
Charlie, we're in the middle of one of the worst economic crashes of the last
maybe
10
saying
years.
it's a good thing's not great.
I don't think you can say we're in a good state.
Great situation.
No, I don't think, no. But the world is not in a great place. That's my point. The world is not.
Neither are we. Neither.
We're not either.
No. But it's all relative. Then again, it's all relative, isn't it? Are you telling me a Labour government would have done a lot better than the Conservative
That wasn't
government?
the question.
Okay. Even so, that was still a very condescending point. Alex, the way you addressed people your age. Anyway, Alex.
Okay, well, I want to discuss both the rise of the right and the left. So the left in our generation, we're the ones who are going to be most affected by firstly this pandemic response. Okay, I'm not going to get onto that topic because that's going to get go on a tangent. But through our lifetimes, what we've seen is the gap between worker productivity and worker wages widen. We're not being paid for what we're producing, and things like the falling rate, the tendency of rate of profit to fall, which is an economic phenomenon talked about by both Smith and Marx and many other economists, and it has proven true. Or the rise of monopoly capitalism, where we're losing our choice and we're paying into bigger and bigger companies. Where does it end? Is it sustainable? I don't think so. Whereas on the other hand, the rise of the right likely comes from the media sentiment against things like immigrants and blaming other people for the economic issues rather than thinking that something new needs to come, which is, although an extreme example, like fascism, it came in a time of economic downturn to try and reset the economy by blaming Jewish people. So, they both kind of rise simultaneously as a solution to a similar problem.
Okay, we got 3 hands up and we've only got a minute and a bit left of this section. So if you think you can summarize what you're about to say in a few words, go for it, Joseph.
All right, I was just going to say, I think social media is a key part of just not exactly the left, but just more extreme political views, just off the simple facts of social media, where you can sort of hide behind a screen. Charlie's talked about sort of people having to advocate that they're socialist and they shouldn't have to hide it. And on social media, you can sort of hide behind a screen without being attacked.
Dylan?
Yeah, so my closing point was, despite how privileged some of us here and some of us, in the areas that we live are, it's still going to be the case that we will never be able to buy a house in a city like London, right, ever in our lifetime, no matter how hard we work, unless we work in something like investment banking or hedge fund banking, right? And I think it's that realization that will actually push more and more people to the left as they grow up, because there just isn't enough money,
Right, Oliver, give us your closing points and thoughts.
I think actually more than social media, maybe in terms of the left, but in terms of the further right, I actually think the newspapers definitely do fuel it. I don't know if I've cut out.
No, we can still hear you.
Have I cut out?
Nope.
No.
So I think the newspapers fuel it. But also, I think people outside of London perhaps may actually turn to it a bit more over socialism. And I'm not saying that's a good at all, but I think we should still be careful saying that extreme positions on either side should be welcomed, because they shouldn't be. It's a bit dangerous to say so.
Oliver, thank you very much. Joseph or Alex next?
Okay, well, I thought I would argue against one of Jonah's favourite things to say, but it's quite a popular thing to say on the right. So there's a common phrase, the free of the market, the free of the people. I would like to discuss against that because I don't agree with it.
Okay, I want so desperately to contribute this, but I will not. I will refrain myself. I might not be able to soon, but for now, I'm not going to take part in
I think
this.
that's fine. You can contribute to it, Jonah.
Charlie, do you want to say something?
No, that's fine. I'm saying you can contribute to it.
I don't want to. Oliver.
Go on.
I think the free of the market, the free of the people applies in the main, because if you're not constrained by various, like, I mean, there was a time in the 1970s when they had 98% income tax, and people would you'd take money out of the country. You were not allowed to take more than £60, and you'd come back, and it would have you'd have spent some money, and you'd end up with actually having more value of money when you came back, because the pound was doing so badly, and that sort of gives people very low mobility. So I think, and that was under basically the closest thing we've had to socialism in this country. So I think the free of the market, the free of the people probably does apply, as it gives people the chance to improve their life, and also not go on holiday and then get prosecuted for coming back with more than £60, which just seems ridiculous.
Dylan.
I think like well, it sounds like the base point of capitalism and the whole point of the free market is that it's easy, right? Because the only way that capitalism has really survived up until now is because we, from like the 50s, 60s on, we could outsource all our labor, same as America, on a massive scale to places where it's cheaper. Like we would not be able to have the same goods and luxuries as we do now if not for the lack of child labor laws up until the last 10 years in places like Indonesia, where you could pay a 7-year-old like 50p a week to make some Nike trainers. We just wouldn't have these things. I think that free the market, free the people only applies to the people consuming. It does not actually apply to people producing, because ultimately capitalism can only thrive in situations of oppression and underrepresentation in payment.
Okay, Alex, I'm going to come to you. Talk to me about what you think of the points Oliver made, and also if free of the market doesn't mean free of the people, explain to me why a stricter market would mean free of the people.
I'm not pro free market, but that's kind of I'm not pro market. That's kind of a separate discussion. But what I was going to say to Oliver's point is, in classical liberal literature that's quite old, liberalism or liberty is made up of two components, and that's freedom to and freedom from. Okay, so let's say we have a free market. You have the freedom from being prevented to do what you want, or you have the freedom to engage in the economic activity you want. But there are many more tangible freedoms, like healthcare, like housing, like education, that are much more important to quality of life than just the freedom to trade. Yeah, that's another point I can make.
Fair enough. Joseph.
Well, so what Oliver took a sort of extreme of market regulation with this ridiculously high income tax, and I was sort of, if you take a look at that extreme, if you look at another extreme, so in this country we do have regulations on the market, as do most countries around the world, and you hear a lot of people saying, oh well, that's not real capitalism because there's regulations on the market, therefore it's not free market and whatnot. But if you actually, a free market does, and you can debate this, whether a free market would enable monopolies, because that's supposedly what the sort of regulation on the market does at the moment. It essentially stops, and it doesn't even work that well, because at the moment you sort of see like what Nestle or their parent company, whatever, owning sort of most of the sort of confectionery brands, and it means, the monopolies, I think, you can argue whether the free market creates them, but I think you can say that monopolies are inherently bad, because they just sort of mean that the monopoly can drive up the price as high as they want, because competition essentially keeps the prices down. Because if you just have a monopoly putting up the price, what's to keep them keeping it down if there's no other competition that's offering something cheaper?
Does anyone not agree that a free, open, capitalist market allows anyone to become successful and rich?
Well, it doesn't, because the inherence of a market under capitalism, you have to put up capital. You're sort of, the free of the market, the free of the people would be true if everyone had excess capital to contribute to the market. The majority of people in this country well, okay, not the majority, but the people who are sort of struggling to put food on the table, they can't say, oh, you know what, I'm going to go out and, invest £50 into this company because it'll, do well and I'll make money. They're thinking about tomorrow's meal, and they don't have that sort of excess capital to invest into the market.
If you have £100, and there are two situations, you're living in a closed market or no market, as Alex wants, or a free market, are your opportunities to get richer bigger in the free market without £100 or the no market?
Well, obviously the free market, but I think that also raises the question, why does anyone, if you've got £100 in a closed market, why do you need to get richer? It's a closed market. In a closed market situation.
People always want to be richer, won't they?
I know, but I mean, think about it. If we were given free healthcare, free education, free food and water, and free shelter, then what would be the point?
Human nature.
No,
I think people are generally quite aspirational, and I think it's better to level up and try and improve the lives of people who are maybe not quite as well off as some others. But the way to do that is not to just basically say, right, you can't have over £100 or else that's bad, and therefore we're going to tax you 100% if you have over £100, and that's basically a closed market, and then everyone's just equally poor. You'd rather have that some people are slightly richer than others, and I think the aim is to sort of make sure the gap isn't so wide that it has like massive inequality, to try cut inequality but not completely, because otherwise you're just going to end up with everyone being poor, because it's not possible for everyone to be rich.
Okay, very quickly to Charlie, then Alex, summarize.
Well, it's a bit of a silly argument in a sense, because you'd rather the gap. You can't see this on the audio, but if you were to look at the video, the gap is, you'd rather the gap to be here than the gap to be up there, right? You'd rather the poor be poorer, but the rich be poorer as well, but much poorer, than the rich be richer and the poor be richer as well. So everyone's living a better life. Yes, there's inequality, but inequality is what keeps human nature going. It's how we have aspirations. It's how we have competition. It's healthy competition to be the best. In capitalism, it's anyone, not everyone. Anyone, not everyone.
Well, since everyone wanted to go around the human nature discussion, I thought I'd actually discuss it. I personally don't believe human nature is a frigid thing. I think it's based on material conditions. However, if you do want to argue that human nature is greedy, then why should we have an economic system where human nature and human greed can lead to such wealth inequality? Why don't we have a system where the greed leads to a better society, first of all? And second of all, there is incentive beyond like financial incentive. Non-money related incentives have proven to work significantly better, because workers generally want to work the least amount of time for the most amount of pay. But if there's incentives like, just things like human hormones that you get from winning competitions or feeling like you've succeeded, have proven to be better.
Okay.
Is that even possible?
All right, hang on, Oliver. We're running out of time. We've been recording for about half an hour already. So, Joseph, if you would like to go for an extra short, quick fire, extra rapid argument, that would be great.
It sort of leads on from what we've just said. I mean, do you think that capitalism breeds or limits innovation and the sort of moving forwards of products and, the sort of technology and, predominant, life-saving and life-improving technologies and services?
Okay, Dylan.
Yes, but only because of nations or people trying to compete with each other and trying to prove they're better. I don't think that capitalism in itself breeds innovation. It's the rewards and the capitalist society around that we live in that rewards it. I know that's a contradiction in itself, but I think that if we weren't to have a capitalist society, there would still be innovation, because instead of the drive being money, the drive would be to improve society just for the sake of improving society, for making the quality of life better. So it's the reward. It's the fact that we live in a capitalist society that breeds innovation. I think with the lack of capitalism, there would still be innovation.
Okay, hang on. I'm gonna restart the recording because it cuts out after 30 minutes. Dylan, I totally understand that point. Oliver?
Actually, I agree with Dylan, basically, in the short, because I think we've learned about this in geography, that a 20th century Swedish economist called Boserup basically said that humans will always create technology to meet challenges such as, like, I don't know, food insecurity or something like that. And I think in this case, I think maybe a capitalist system is better for it, but I don't think if we had a socialist system, I think if it was run properly, perhaps, like, i.e. not starving your own citizens, perhaps, yeah, it could still definitely be achieved. So I don't think it's necessarily because of capitalism. I think it's more about the way it's run, because you can have people starving in capitalist countries too.
Alex, very quickly.
I think there's two issues with innovation under capitalism, and those are patents and monopolies. So, for example, patents, we've seen what happens with international cooperation and general cooperation with the COVID vaccine. And you can also see this in Shenzhen with Huaqiangbei market, where new technology is produced every day super cheaply because they don't have patents, they don't have that intellectual property rights that other countries do. And it's a similar thing with monopolies, as in, you know, once capitalism reaches its late stage where monopolies kind of inevitably form, there is basically no incentive to invest money in technologies when that's a loss of profits, when you could just keep doing what you're doing and there's no competition.
Charlie, 30 seconds, and then to Joseph to summarize.
Yeah, so I just got a question actually. Do you think this idea of a centralized economy under a more socialist government, do you think that leads to tyranny?
Whoa, a little bit off topic. Joseph,
Okay.
you maybe want
I
to
mean-
answer that question whilst summarizing your argument at the same time.
Yeah, I'll try. I might just split it in two. I'd
Yeah.
say that, you know, if you think about the amount of people trapped in poverty at the moment, unable to get above the poverty line, you know, you think about, you know, all these ideas that humans have, technologies that people develop because of the virtue of their own minds. If you think about that, and you think about all of these people who have those ideas but don't have the material conditions or facilities to implement their ideas, that doesn't breed innovation. While there is innovation, there can always be more if you get people out of poverty, you know. And to the tyranny one, I mean, you're probably gonna draw on past examples of, say, I don't what, the USSR or any other socialist attempting state or whatnot. And if you think, I mean, you can go over the sort of history of past attempted socialist governments and sort of, you know, critique them and all of that. But I think, you know, no leads to tyranny, not inherently. You know, the USSR throughout most of its existence was trying not to get invaded by the West, as, you know, most of these countries do. So a socialist government which, you know, advocates to, you know, stop, you know, imperialism, they have two choices. They either disarm themselves, like a lot of South American countries do, you know, are invaded, or, you know, a coup staged in them by the US. You know, it's happening in almost every South American country, and they fall, or they do what the USSR did essentially and sort of try to, you know, outgun the US throughout, you know, the Cold War and essentially most of its existence. And then in that sense, people will always say, oh, well, it just leads to tyranny. It's like, if all of these imperialist nations didn't try to impose and invade, then they could actually just get on with it without having to waste their revenue and economy on trying to, you know, win an arms race.
Okay, I mean, I can't really remember anyone invading the USSR other than Hitler, but okay. So I am going to have to stop it there, because if not, we will just go on talking for hours. Thank you all so much for coming on. It has been fun. Perhaps, Charlie, maybe next time you can chair it so I can perhaps get more involved. So thank you to Joseph, Oliver, Dylan, and Alex. Your time has been very much valued, and maybe we'd hope to see you on again sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Cheers for having us.
Cheers, Jonah. Thank you.
Thank you.